Hi, my name is Ford Vockel, and for my final presentation, I will be presenting two saints that were not within the Everything to Know About the Saints series. Specifically, I'm going to be discussing two connected saints that still have some presence today with phenomenon named after them in the scientific community, which through my arc as a STEM student, I've come across and found very, very interesting, and so researched these saints. Now, I will be discussing two saints today, the first of which is Saint Elmo or Saint Erasmus of Formia. Now, he's the patron saint of sailors as well as of abdominal pain. Now, what's important to know is he was born about halfway through the second century, or the 1200s, and he was actually, if we're going to talk about his life, he was the Bishop of Formia. Now, Formia was a pretty important port city within Italy, which was kind of the center of a lot of trade and so had a large Christian population. Now, this was during the time of mass Christian persecution by the Roman Empire, specifically by two people which you're going to need to know, Diocletian and Maximian Hercules. Both of these two people are very important to know. Now, during the persecution, Saint Elmo, or Saint Erasmus, ended up fleeing the city of Formia to go hide out on a mountain called Mount Libanus. Now, he ended up hiding out here for 7 years of his life before eventually, while he was sleeping, he woke up to an angel talking to him. The angel told him, Erasmus, no one vanquishes enemies if he is asleep. Go to your own city, and you shall vanquish your enemies. Of course, this prompted him to go and return to his home city of Formia, though he had some trouble along the way. There are 4 key events of interest in this section of his life. First, when he was heading back to Formia, he ended up encountering some soldiers. To these soldiers, he declared himself a Christian, and due to the persecution, he ended up being brought to trial at Antioch before the first person, the Emperor Diocletian. Now, St. Elmo fearlessly confessed his faith in Christ and furthermore actually denounced the emperor for his impiety. Now, of course, obviously, this led to him getting tortured, as they did back in the day. So he was subjected to torture, but he remained unbending. He ended up being bound in iron chains and being tossed into prison. However, just like when he was in Mount Libanus, an angel ended up appearing to him and said, Follow after me, I will lead you to Italy. There you shall bring many people to salvation. He ended up just being miraculously saved from prison. Whoa! And so because of that, he ended up going back to a town called Lycia, where after he raised the son of an upper class woman from the dead, he ended up baptizing over 10,000 people in just a few months, which is ridiculous. Anyway, this kind of pissed off one of the people persecuting Christians, the second person, Maximian Hercules. He ended up being taken and put in trial in where? Syracum, and so he was once again tortured. He was first, though, sent to the temple of an idol, which means he was sent to a temple that was worshiping a god other than the Abrahamic Christian God. And so while he was on the way to the temple, there were a ton of statues along the path. They were all crumbling around him, which is crazy. That's awesome. Anyway, after this, he started his return to Formia. And this eventually, first, led to his punishment for destroying all the idols. Now, as you can probably expect, he was tortured by Maximian Hercules. He was actually thrown in a red-hot oven. However, when he was in that, he was completely unfazed. He was just totally chilling. This miracle of him not being, boiled alive ended up creating so much civil unrest that the emperor retreated away to, get the hands off. Of course, though, once again, he was saved by an angel. So, yet another miraculous save, where he ended up going back to Formia, where he lived until he was in his late 80s, until he died naturally in 303 after baptizing thousands and thousands more. This is awesome. He's awesome. But what that doesn't explain is why he's the patron saint of sailors. All this, horrible stuff with the torture makes sense why abdominal pain would be one, but why the other? Well, this is because of a story where at some point in his life, Erasmus, who is again also known as Elmo, preached to sailors while at sea. While he was preaching, a storm came up, and even though Erasmus was almost struck by a bolt of lightning, he kept preaching anyway. Sailors, because of this, started praying to him started asking for his prayers. And so, when they started to see a phenomenon on their ship where at the tops of their metal masts, they would see like little flickers of lightning going off towards the sky during a storm. They would, identify him and pray to him. And so this effect began to be known as Saint Elmo's fire. Now, this is actually caused by so when a storm happens, there are a bunch of little charged ions in the sky. And so those interact with the charged ions within the metal masts of the ships. And so what happens is those kind of ends keep like shifting their charges back and forth, which has like little bolts of lightning coming off as like little bursts of energy flowing from side to side. So it kind of looks like a flame. It's a super duper cool phenomenon. I'm trying to do study with ASU, but it's a super duper cool phenomenon that has cool applicable uses for generating power. And it also happens on jets, which I thought is also pretty cool. And so, anyway, super cool stuff. This ended up being named St. Elmo's Fire, and this whole experience ended up having him be known as the patron saint of sailors. Now we go to our second saint, Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and entertainers. Now, let's go over his life. Now, Saint Vitus is often called the adolescent martyr. So he was first born in Sicily to a upper class man in 290 AD. Now, Sicily, especially with the upper class, was very anti-Christian. So eventually, when Saint Vitus kind of started going towards that faith, mostly because of his tutor, his dad was not happy and would beat him and torture him, all in the effort of getting him to renounce his Catholic faith. As you can probably tell, he didn't do that, and he ended up fleeing Rome with his tutor and his tutor's wife, also his nanny. Now, they lived outside of Rome for a few years until eventually they were called back. You see, during this time, St. Vitus had kind of become holy. Like he was performing miracles, was curing people of diseases. So, because of this, the emperor Diocletian, from our last story, called him back to the city to cure his son of epilepsy. St. Vitus, he got the job done. He ended up curing Diocletian's son successfully, but despite this, Diocletian started torturing him. All trying to get him to renounce his faith, and just like the last guy, he did not renounce his faith and actually insulted the emperor. Now, sadly, unlike Saint Elmo, he later died from his wounds from being tortured, which sucks. Now this is very clearly what makes him one of the saints of epilepsy, but why dancers and entertainers? Well, this is actually because of a phenomenon that came in place after his death. You see, all saints have feast days, and in Germany, Saint Vitus's feast day was widely celebrated. However, during his feast day especially, there started to become a dance mania, where during his feast, many people would be able to uncontrollably dance and dance and dance until they ended up dropping dead from exhaustion. No one knew why this was, so they all thought that it was, Saint Vitus blessing them, I guess. But it turns out that this was actually something called Sydenham's chorea, which is a neurological disease that makes it so that like your joints and your muscles will like spasm out repeatedly and uncontrollably. And this is caused by extreme bits of excitement or overindulgence in calories, like during a feast. And so this is super interesting because it also links together with what he was known for during his time of curing epilepsy, which is also a neurological disease that causes uncontrollable joint spasms. So just super cool, maybe coincidence, maybe not. So, yeah. So what's important about both of these is that they are part of a group of saints called the 14 Holy Helpers. What this means is that in times of famine or sickness or disease, you will pray to these saints specifically for good favor. Now, Saint Elmo is the saint of abdominal pain. Blech. And so you obviously pray to him for stuff going on with your stomach. And then for neurological diseases, Saint Vitus is very closely affiliated with that, so it's kind of obvious why you would pray to him. Anyway, that's it. Thank you so much. I'm Ford Vockel. Thank you so much for the whole course. I really, really liked it. I was super glad to have taken it. I'm super glad I got to talk about two super interesting saints that have really cool modern day scientific phenomenon named after them. And actually, they both have heavy rock bands taking inspiration from them. New York City band Geese, the final song on their album 3D Country is called Saint Elmo, and it's a hodgepodge of different instrumental sounds, as well as there was a Black Sabbath inspired band called Saint Vitus, who has those same super duper heavy rock elements. I just kind of felt like telling you that. No, no, it's not really relevant. I don't think I need to pad out for time. Thank you so much. Woo!